Thank you, Joanna. Thank you, Adrian, for that. Up next, I often attend events like this and come away having heard the latest buzzwords and leave with what can only be termed conference envy, where you've heard of other people who have implemented the latest and the greatest technologies and already reaping the benefits. This year's a little different. As I said earlier, I work at the University of Wolverhampton. So up next, I have three colleagues who are going to tell you about all the buzzwords that we have implemented. We've got Dean Harris, Assistant Director for Infrastructure, who throughout the session will then be joined by Kate Iddles, Systems Engineer, and Jerry Niman, Independent Consultant. Please welcome Dean to the stage.
Cheers, Matt. Afternoon, everyone. Sorry about the after dinner slot. We'll try to make this as painless as possible. We went for the longest title with the most buzzwords in that we could get for this afternoon session because it was after lunch. As Matt said, we're from Wolverhampton and we're doing some of those exciting projects that Joanna talked about. So our project started in the university, like many of your own institutions, is investing a lot of money. And we're investing in our physical estate, we're changing our curriculum, and we're diversifying more than we've ever done previously. We're building new science facilities, but we also now have 2 race teams. So we have a Formula 3 race car and we have 2 Morgan race cars, and that's new for us. And the diversity is putting pressure on us as an IT service because there's a lot of unknowns, there's a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot of requests that don't have planning and purpose. And so last year we hit a landmark event as far as we were concerned, in that we had approval from the university executive for a £30 million digital business transformation programme. And it was a business-focused programme. It was about technological enablement, not technology for technology's sake. And that's our digital campus. As you saw from this morning in Apps Anywhere, this is kind of our reference slide deck for those people there, so I'm not meaning to bore you. The reason we got approval for this at our executive level was because we weren't trying to do technology for technology's sake. We were trying to make a difference to the business, and a difference in the way in which we did our business. We were shackled with some of those traditional stereotypes about IT. We did things in the same way. We always like to build. It's safe, it's secure, and it's robust, and we know it, and it's friendly, and it's good. But we had to start looking deeper than that. We had to look at the business processes, the integration into the organisation. Who is actually owning services? Should it be us? Should it be the business? And then look at the people and the culture. One, our organisation was demanding that we change, that we become more agile. And we weren't in a position to respond effectively to that. We framed, it was 4 projects that became 5 projects. And the key one of those, I won't repeat what went through this morning, but the key one for that was the digital platforms project. It wasn't very sexy or very exciting for the university. It was a lot of the systems that the university doesn't see, but are fundamental to the business operations and efficiency of the organisation. So we had to do a lot of education of senior stakeholders. We were embarking on this great transition of business digitisation and change. But we had a problem in our data centres. We've got multi-sites. And our compute and our storage was woeful. We didn't have capacity. It was going out of date. It was end-of-life equipment. It's an expensive process. And we were going through that education with our senior stakeholders, trying to get funding and finance. We were into year 7 of our old compute and storage environment. We were into extended warranties. Things were starting to get a little bit scary for us in the IT department. But trying to educate people on what storage is actually important to them became an exercise we undertook. So we took a look at our requirements before going to market. And our requirements weren't scintillating, they weren't unusual. We needed scalability. We needed something, some environment that was hypervisor agnostic. We run VMware, we also run Hyper-V. And we were never going to change that because certain things do have certain roles. It had to be highly available and resilient. We run a 24/7 365 operation, and we don't run the support processes of a 365 organisation. We're not staffed that way, and we don't keep those hours. So we had to put as much intelligence into the systems as we could. We're multi-site, so it had to work for those DR scenarios. And we wanted to simplify the management. Our old SAN infrastructure and virtualization was like a black art, and only a few people could actually work with it. But more than that, we were all aware the market was changing, and this was 2 years ago we started down this route. And so we made the decision that we wanted to look for innovation in the marketplace. And that led us to go through an open OJU tender, so we could see who was interested in what we were doing and what the market was dictating. And we'll cover a little bit of that later. So, we went through a procurement process that was protracted. And, following on from Logicalis' presentation earlier, the solution which won our process was IT by wire, delivered by Logicalis using HPE technologies. And it was hyper-converged, which was interesting because we didn't really know a lot about hyper-converged when we started on this route. But it made lots of promises. And we kind of bought into that. And it was kind of exciting. It was faster to work with. It was more efficient. It was optimized specifically for virtualization, which is our default route. And it was scalable. We didn't suffer from those things whereby our expansion was cost prohibitive in our old world. But we wanted more than just a hyper-converged system. That was great, but it was just one element. So we actually have a stack now. And our stack starts with converged infrastructure at the bottom. It then moves up to our virtualization layer. And we are still a VMware house and a Hyper-V house. We use VMware in this architecture. And Hyper-V will be coming on stream later. But more than that, we wanted greater efficiency in our operations, and we wanted greater business visibility. So on top of there, we put automation as a requirement. But on top of automation, we knew that we were always going to be a hybrid cloud institution. There are certain things we have to keep on site. And there's a maturity argument in our organisation. So we wanted to be able to exploit cloud, but not be governed by a move to the cloud. So we needed a cloud service layer. And then we needed business visibility and insights. We don't charge for our services, like many people have said, but we wanted the ability to show back the cost of our services and look at what our environment was doing, both from a technical and a business perspective. So instrumentation and analytics was a necessity. And somebody will talk to you about all the technical details shortly, Kate. So, what did that look like? There we go. So, our solution is predicated on HP servers and software currently. We use Veeam for our backup. And we have an option of cloud integration. A lot's been said over the last couple of days about OpenStack. We felt it was right to get a solution that worked with OpenStack, because it's a bag of bits, yeah, but it's a bag of bits that can be quite powerful, and we didn't want to preclude those kind of standards that were emerging. So on each of those layers, we have a different product portfolio, but a product portfolio that integrates seamlessly and works with one another, so that we're not managing lots and lots of different elements. So, those are all the elements of our stack as they are, and now we'll talk a little bit more about the detailed infrastructure, so I'm going to pass over to Kate.
Which one is it?
Forward that now.
Right, thank you. Right, thank you, Dean. As he said, we actually brought the entire stack, and I'm going to try and work up from the bottom upwards and show you what we brought. We basically put the solution onto 3 of our campuses. Our main campus is the Wolverhampton one. I've got a more detailed slide coming up next. But we also put a smaller scale installation into our Telford and Walsall sites. And for the solution, we did try and go as much as possible to go scale out, because we want to grow it when we need to. But we also wanted to put in resilience, so we didn't have too many single points of failure. And so as you'll see in a lot of the slides, we've actually got duplication or redundancy built in. So at Telford and Walsall, we've got 2 top-of-rack switches. Basically gives resilience, but it also gives us 10 gigabit within the solution. We have 3 compute nodes and a storage node. which forms our Hyper-Converged layer, and those are based on HPE Gen 9 servers. They use 2 tiers, a tier 0, tier 1, and that's SSDs and SASs, and the load moves between the tiers automatically using heat maps and adaptive optimizations, so we don't have to worry about any of that. We've got a couple of VM servers which do our virtual machine backups, and they've got locally attached storage. And then on the Wolverhampton site, we've actually got 2 data centres. These are just under a mile apart, and they're linked by 2 separate pairs of dark fibre. And then we're sort of mirroring these, the hardware in both of them. So for the compute layer on this one, we've actually got 6 compute nodes in each data centre and 3 storage nodes. And again, it's the tier 0 and tier 1. And that uses network RAID 10, and it's a synchronous replication. We've got 2 10 gig top of rack switches in both installations. Again, that gives us a resilience. It also gives us our 10 gigabit connectivity within the solution. We've got 2 VM servers with locally attached disk storage for our short-term backups, and we've got 2 more VM backup servers with locally attached tape libraries, and that gives us our longer-term retention of those various copy jobs between the 2. And also we've got 3 HPE Helium management nodes. It actually shows 3 in 1 there, but it's actually a 2 and a 1 split, to make sure that if we lose a data center, they actually get swapped over. All the hardware across the entire solution is actually all the same. It's all HPE Gen 9 DL380s, and all the compute nodes have all got 32 cores in. They all offer an aggregate 20 gigabit of bandwidth. That's 10 for the storage and 10 for the virtual machines, and they all offer 19 terabytes of usable storage. And the storage nodes are actually much lower spec. They're only offering 1 CPU, but again, it's the aggregate 20 gigabit of bandwidth and the 19 terabytes of storage. And basically, it's a bit like licensed. It was a bit cheaper for the storage nodes using that model. For our VMware site, we're using a VMware Metro cluster. So that's a stretch cluster, and that combined with the storage clustering means we've actually got read-write in both data centres, so we can actually fail things across and nobody will notice. And for our Telford and Walsall sites, that wasn't possible, so we're actually using VM replication with near continuous data protection. So with this, VM creates a copy, registers in the Wolverhampton site, and then there's a continuously running job to replicate the VM across. And then if we lose a site, it's a manual failover, and when the site comes back, it's a manual fail back to get that VM back to the campus. Oh, I've gone to the wrong one there, sorry. Sorry, I pressed the wrong button. Thank you.
Just avoid the bottom.
Just avoid the bottom too. Okay. So the virtualisation, we've actually got 1 single vCenter server that manages the entire cluster. So within Wolverhampton, we can do the vMotions with no downtime. We've got the automatic load balancing and the anti-infinity laws to keep our systems separate, like our student record environment. And then for Telford and Walsall, we're using VM replication to replicate the VMs across. Keeps it simple, because there's not many of us who do all the management tasks. Yeah. So on the automation, we went for HPE Helium, and we haven't actually implemented it yet, so it's going to be the next phase. But the idea is it will give us complete lifecycle management across the solution. So our customers or users will be presented with marketplace portals, which are just web pages specifically designed, offering various services. And that could be adding compute, or a complete template rebuild of a VM, or a bare metal rebuild. And underneath that sits all the orchestration and automation layers, completely hidden from the user. And then using those exact same tools, we will actually be able to go into the public cloud if we want to. So we can either go private cloud on premise, or we go public cloud, and that's why the OpenStack mechanism that Dean was talking about. And my final slide, yes, is the tools we're actually using. So at the heart of the entire thing is vCenter. Within that, we've got a HPE OneView plugin that integrates with our store virtual appliances. which means we can create with a single click data stores and present them. We can delete them with a single click and unpresent them. The solution is continuously monitored by VPV or Cloud Optimizer, and that looks at, gives us forecasting and growth projections. It also looks at our VMs to see, are they oversized, undersized, or just about the right size. So from that performance data, we can then feed that back into the Helium, and we can either give our customers to say, well, do you want to resize it based on what you're using, or we can resize it, and that feeds back into OneView. And that's me done.
Thank you. Which is the one I have to avoid?
The one at the bottom.
All right, okay. I'm trying to avoid that. Now the bit you've all been waiting for. The project management. The background from a project point of view, I came into this quite optimistic. This is just a technology refresh. This is all very straightforward. It's not going to affect the end users. They're going to see exactly what they had before when the project's completed. They're not going to have to change anything. We're not upgrading them virtual servers. We're just picking them up, moving them across and dropping them. Same version of everything, same amount of RAM, same number of processors, same amount of storage. We're not making any changes there. The in-house team, I have to say, are very experienced, very, very skilled indeed. No problems on that front at all, so that's all going to go really smoothly. And we knew exactly what we wanted to do. A lot of work had gone into the requirement spec. We weren't making it up as we went along. We knew precisely what we were going to do. When we'd done the procurement, the supplier, Logicalis, well established. They've been around a long time, and the solution that we're getting is from HPE. They know what they're up to, so it's all looking good. And because it's VMware to VMware, there was going to be no interrupting to existing services. We could pull them across transparently during the day. What could possibly go wrong with all of this? Well, we've got a little while to go yet, so as you can probably assume, we did have a few bumps on the road. I'll come back to those. But we went into it full of optimism. So the approach to project management, well, this is the most critical of the foundation project in that all the others depend on it, as well as all the existing infrastructure of the university. And we're spending a lot of money. So although it was, in theory, very low risk, very straightforward, we decided to go in, dedicated project manager, and run it as a nice formal project, and that's how I got involved. We're going to use fairly straightforward Prince 2. That seems to do the trick for most projects. The project board knew exactly what it was doing, and quite importantly, from the very beginning, we decided that whoever the supplier was, they were going to be a full member of the project board. So that turned out to be absolutely key later on. The project team meetings were critical, I think it's fair to say. We got together every week. Sometimes it was, is there much to discuss? There was always plenty to discuss, and it made sure that everybody involved knew exactly what was going to happen. And again, the supplier team was a full part of that. There were very few occasions where we wanted to discuss something without them present, and it really kept things together during the difficult times that we went through at points. And we had very deep technical discussions with the suppliers, because the in-house team really wanted to understand what was going on inside the solution to make sure that it was fit for purpose now and would remain so, and we knew what we could do with it, what we couldn't do with it, what impact it would have on the service and all of that. Some of it was structured in workshops that the supplier was going to hold anyway. A lot of it was, as an issue came up, we got together with them and say, how does this work? What's the best way forward? Dean mentioned that the business process changes were included in the scope. These are mostly internal business processes. One of the things that we hoped to gain was to get out of the position we'd been in with the old infrastructure, in that it got full and that the capacity management had got out of hand, and we got behind with the versions of VMware and VM tools and the OS and things like that. So we decided this time, and as part of the project, we're going to think, how are we going to handle that? How are we going to handle capacity management? How are we going to plan the upgrades? How are we going to maintain a suite of standard server templates? So they were all part of the project, not something that would hopefully get worked out separately. Yeah, we had a very detailed project initiation document and the business case, and the project board was very good in that every time we changed something, we rewrote those, went back to the project board went through them quite carefully, and they were approved. So it's not something that we created and then put on the shelf and forgot. Those were being changed right up to the very end of the project, and every time there was a change, project board made sure they were happy with what we were changing. Risk logs, action logs, issue logs, both teams, the internal team, the external team, get fed up with me actively managing these phone calls every day, way up to which you issue such and such. They were on the agenda for the project board, of course, they were on the agenda for the project team meetings. Nobody forgot about anything that was open. And all the logs and all the documents were on a SharePoint site. And again, quite crucially, it was a SharePoint site that we made sure the supplier, Logicalis staff, had access to. So it wasn't a question of, can you send me a copy of? They could see everything that was going on in the project all the time, and that really helped. So that's how we went about it. The procurement itself, Dean's mentioned, ODU open tender process. We wanted to cast the net as wide as possible, find out what types of solutions were out there. As a result of that, we got 98 companies said we were interested, but 21 of them were only interested enough to turn up to the supplier day. So, but as is always the case in these things, some of the people are interested. They make power supplies, they make air conditioning units. If it says computer in, we'll stick in an expression of interest. That was quite fun. But the suppliers day went very well. 21 vendors asking a lot of sensible questions, highlighting things that we hadn't thought of, and we had to make sure we got the answers back to everybody on those specific questions. Out of that, 9 people submitted a tender, and having gone through the tender in detail, we invited 7 of those suppliers to present to us on site. The tender markings, we did them individually. Each person took a particular section and gave their own marks, and then we got together and compared the marks. And that was really, really valuable process. I'd highly recommend doing it that way, because when somebody marked 7 out of 10 for this, and somebody else marked 3 out of 10 for the same thing, you discuss, why is that? And we're pretty confident we found every wrinkle in every submission by that process of people doing it themselves and then comparing results. A lot of the differences were flushed out, but also an awful lot of things we found were totally consistent across all the markers. So we have a high degree of confidence in that process. Ooh, I think nothing to do with that. Dean mentioned it's a drawn-out process. It's not, well, I don't know. 5th of June, the adverts went in the journal, and by the end of November, we'd placed an order. So it's not that bad. It's not something to be totally scared of. But you do need to appreciate it takes that long to do. So, was it all plain sailing? No, it wasn't. There were quite a lot of bumps on the road. At various stages in the project, we've said if anything can go wrong with the project, it went wrong with this one. We'd put in an estimate of what it was going to cost, and every one of the tenders came in above that budget. So straight away, we had to get approval from finance to have the budget increased. Not so much of a drama in its own right, but that led on to other things. Because we had to get approval, it took us quite a while to do that, and that meant that the order wasn't as placed when we had planned for the order to be placed. It was placed, I think in the end, 5 weeks later than we'd planned for. On top of that, the hardware was delivered to Logicalis a little bit late, but altogether that put quite a chunk of delay into the project. Also, I think Logicalis would accept that this turned out to be more complex to configure than they'd anticipated. It's not anything they haven't done before, but I think it was a combination of the particular technologies plus the multi-site and the resilience that we'd specified caused quite a bit of head scratching. Now, because we placed the order late, because the hardware was a bit slow, and because there was an underestimate of the effort, the decision got taken somehow to try and stick with the delivery date that had been set out in the tender. We can deliver by a particular date. And to do that, the low-level design was made to overlap with some of the build, because I thought, well, putting kitchen racks and wiring up the racks, that doesn't require detail on a low-level design. So things started to overlap. And then things got serious. The project manager from Logicalis had a serious personal problem. He had to leave the project. His replacement project manager had a death in the very close family. He had to leave the project. That was about 2 weeks after the first one. And then very shortly after that, the Logicalis technical lead had a death in the family. He had to be swapped. So, you couldn't write this. If this was EastEnders, somebody would say that was just unrealistic. That can't happen. Can't believe it. And then when we went through the low-level design exercise, it turned out that the migrations, because the version of VM tools was different on what we were getting from what we had, the migrations couldn't be done seamlessly. We would have to take services down. That hadn't been planned for, and in the discussions that had already taken place with the service owners, we've been saying this is on the basis that at some time your service is going to be at risk, but it will stay up. Turns out it wasn't going to stay up. So we had to go back and have further discussions with the service owners, at which point the service owners, it turned out, weren't necessarily speaking on behalf of the users of the service. So we said, well, when is a convenient time when we can take it down? Oh, well, I don't know. You're asking the wrong person. Well, who should I ask? I don't know. And that became a bit of a crisis. How do we find out, reach agreement, reach the people who are going to be affected, to tell them, you know what, there will be a short interruption to the service, and we need to know when's the least disruptive for us to do that. So, we had bumps on the roads. What do? We use road rollers. And the most important one, by far, was transparency and communication between the project teams and the project board. It's quite difficult to say to yourself, this problem, I think I might be able to solve it, but nevertheless, I'm going to make sure everybody's aware of it, just in case I can't. And everybody in the team were really quite impressive that people didn't keep problems to themselves. It was shared with everybody. We knew where we were up to all the time, and that helped tremendously. It didn't feel like it at times, but in retrospect, there was a great deal of teamwork going on across the supplier-customer relationship. You know, people sat at desks next to each other and all sorts of things like that, that really kept things moving. It would have been easy to fall into, well, it's your problem to solve, nothing to do with us, but we didn't do that. We were the customer was suggesting solutions all the time to the supplier was saying, have you thought about approaching it this way? We worked very well together. And the project board was really interested in what was going on. They didn't interfere too much, but when we needed some escalation to get more money or to get somebody to reach a decision on whether an interrupting schedule was okay, the project board really came around and helped. And it really helped that the supplier was on the project board because they were really, really tied into this project. Logicalis, to their credit, have moved heaven and earth to get this one going for us. Didn't try and run away from it, didn't try and hide behind the contract, anything. They've really pulled out all the stops. And there were times when things were really getting a bit tough, when we met every morning, without fail. 9 o'clock, was it 9? Or 9:30, I can't remember now. And it didn't matter whether everybody could get there or not. That meeting went ahead. We discussed what had happened yesterday, where we were up to, what we were planning to do today, and who was going to do it. There was work still to be done after we'd taken the first VM across. Now that meant that any work that was being done on the infrastructure from that point onwards had to be subject to formal change control, and that's not something you would normally do. Normally you get it all working, and when you're happy, you've done all the acceptance tests, then the production services go across. We turned it back to front, so we put this in place to make sure that didn't embarrass us too much. As we mentioned before, keep right on top of the risks, keep on top of the issues, keep on top of the queries. Don't lose anything, and that took a lot of work and paid dividends. Right from the beginning, we had detailed written acceptance tests. If it does this, then we'll accept it. If it doesn't, we're not going to accept it. That was tremendous, not just from the point of view of assuring ourselves it was going to work, but as a vehicle for sharing understanding of what was expected between the customer and the supplier. The supplier would turn around and say, well, we won't do that. And so why not? And you could have a discussion about the functionality, and assumptions have been made on one side that weren't borne out in practice. I'm really glad that we had those. And when things got tough, the service desk came to the fore with their knowledge of who actually were the real users of these services affected. And they were really helpful in saying, right, well, if you can't get anybody to say when the service should be migrated, they went off, found out who the key users were, consulted with them, came back with the schedule. That was brilliant. We ended up moving a rate of 1 VM in the morning, 1 VM in the afternoon, sometimes a couple of VMs. We could have done it a lot faster than that, but it was more a question of the communication. We need to get the message out, that's going down now, do the migration, test it, get the message out, it's back up again. And we kept it at that sort of pace, nice and easy. 100 virtual machines were migrated overall, and we recovered practically all of the slippage. So the outcomes from the project perspective, I know Dean's going to say a little bit more from the technical and from the business perspective, but as a project, we completed all the migrations on the 17th of June. That's 3 months later than we said we would, right back at the beginning of the project, which was almost a year earlier. And given everything that had happened, we're very pleased with that outcome. We've already demonstrated robustness in the face of data center outage. We lost one of the data centers because of an air conditioning problem. And the kit just carried on. It just rolled on. None of the services went down. I don't think any users knew it happened. So we know that resilience, which is so much effort went into designing that into the solution. We know that resilience worked. There were no unscheduled service outages during the migrations. Everything that went across at the time it was supposed to. Nothing fell down outside that. And by and large, the user population, other than the particular service that affected them, they didn't know this had happened. The project completion was the end of August 2016. We originally said it was going to be 4 months before that, but as I say, we were quite pleased with that outcome. It was the first of the digital campus projects to complete, so we're very pleased with that. There is a little bit of work left to do, as Kate mentioned, but the project board has formally said they're happy for that work to be managed under the business as usual processes within the department. And we carried out 2 lessons learned exercises, one for the project team, one for the project board. Tremendously detailed, tremendously honest, and hugely valuable for the projects that are going to follow on. Okay, thank you very much.
Right, back to me just to wind up. So Jerry told you about the project outcomes, but where are we from a business perspective? So we invested a lot of money in something that had a lot of potential. So where are we now? We now have a scalable architecture and a scalable infrastructure system that allows us to expand on a commodity basis. We know the cost of expanding our organisation now. We can give detailed figures to our finance director that map out our capacity management. The tools we have, and a challenge which many of us have, we now have tools that give us insights into when we're going to hit breakpoints. They also allow us to model our capacity management so we can see the impact of projects before we start them and where they will reside on our infrastructure. We have a simplified management of our environment. All of this may look scary and lots of elements. There are actually 2 people that manage it for everything. We are resource lean, therefore we need to use the automation. And so there are 2 people that have the day-to-day management aspects of all of this entity. We're hypervisor agnostic, so we are tied into HP for that, our software. It was a conscious choice. We made that choice. What it allows us to do, though, is change the portfolio of products we use from a hardware perspective and a software perspective. We can still use VMware, we can still use Hyper-V, but we can manage them as one entity. We have service mobility. We've not tried this yet, though. This is one of our revolutions. In that, because we're using Helion, we're not tied into a single cloud provider. The engine translates the proprietary formats so that we aren't tied into one cloud vendor. We can actually move those services or split those services, taking on board all architectural reference. Service availability was one of our key things. We run an uptime of 99.99% and have done for many years. So we can't have a drop in that service. It's now a base expectation, and we have to report on that as one of our KPIs. And as Jerry said, we had an unfortunate event in which we lost a data center, and all of our services seamlessly failed over, but then failed back. The key thing. So when the data center, there was nothing for us to do to try and re-engineer this and fix the problem. It just worked. Data protection, we now have better backups, better snapshots, and a better ability to manage our information regardless if it's online, offline, or in long-term archive storage. So from a business and from an IT business, we've bought capabilities. We've changed the way in which we do. We're now a broker of services rather than just a builder and a constructor. We've got a platform that allows us to offer agility, whether we do it or whether we're using other services that we then wrap up. There were some incidental benefits as well, which we kind of were looking for, and it goes back to what the council presentations earlier. We got some great stats. We measured the power and things like that. So I've got my notes here just there. So our running costs were 90% less per VM and per terabyte of storage than the previous SAN architecture. Our carbon footprint is 56% less per VM now, and 82% less per terabyte of storage. So we're saving money on the total cost of ownership of the solution, and it's aiding our green agenda. And really, we're just realising the benefits. We don't really know all the power of this. There's a lot to this solution whereby we're still understanding, we're still in a maturity, it's changing our skills base. We'll never get rid of people, we're just changing the jobs that people are doing, and we're adding more value back into the business. It's been a massive team effort by everyone. Jerry quite rightly said, we've had a great team. We've had some hurdles, and without the team we've got on there of technical people, of proficient project management, and Jerry and I in IT services get our recommendation for anyone in the room. But also our partner Logicalis. It's been all the way up to executive endorsement from Logicalis. The MD has been talking to us about the commitment. And you have to walk into a project like this with the commitment of all the people in there, because it's not always plain sailing, and we've certainly found that. What we can say at the end of this, well, at the start of our journey we've just got to now, is it was definitely the right thing to do. And we're just learning the benefits now. So, thank you, and we'll take questions if there's any. No? Stunned silence? The guys are around. Also, I should say, it's been quite a successful solution for us. We've been to places like Germany, we've got lots of councils, we've got motor manufacturers who happen to be down the road who are interested in this kind of technology. It is emerging and it is coming up. So if anybody wants any information, please get in touch with us. But I think it's a question over there.
Hiya. You mentioned the benefit of having very detailed and written acceptance tests. I thought that was a super point. Would you be willing to share your detailed written acceptance tests?
Absolutely. We learned a lot through this process. So we'd be quite open to that entirely. So if you want to contact us, or through Matt's obviously part of our team, so his contact details are widely published. But it's not a problem. Yeah, certainly. Anything for anyone else? No? Thank you.